All right, all right, all right. Welcome back, guys, to a brand new episode of the Pursuit of Progress podcast. As always, my name is Adam, and I'm here with my co host, Benjamin Adams. Ben, what is up, my man?
Oh, I'm doing great. And guess what? We are back at it, aren't we? Pursuit of progress. We're back at it.
Yep, this is season 2, episode 19, which, as I do my math, that means we're at total episode number 69. So we're almost to 75, and we'll be at episode 100 by, I think that probably will be before the end of the year. So pretty cool to think that we're at that point of our journey with these podcast weekly episodes. Hopefully our audience is getting some value from them and enjoying them as much as we are making them for you guys.
Yeah, and it wouldn't be possible without all of our supporters, our fans. And so thank you so much for tuning in and supporting us on this journey.
Yeah, it means a lot, you guys. So this one today, the topic we wanted to talk about is something that I think first became aware of by the GOAT, the GOAT, Tony Robbins, probably one of the biggest, just influencers before there were influencers, just one of the original OGs when it comes to self-improvement, personal development, all that good stuff. And what I'm kind of alluding to here is a phrase that he commonly uses, which is burn the boats. And the topic today is burn the boats when playing it safe is actually the riskier move. So this is going to be all about risk taking, commitment, and just again that hidden cost of safety or playing it safe in business, investing, and life. So Ben, do you have any thing to add to that before I share a little bit more with our fans and audience?
Well, I'm so glad that we're having this conversation. And I'm excited to share some of my experiences and my stories. This is a conversation that needs to be had. I think, especially for folks that are younger. But then also for kind of that middle age crowd too. If you're in your 30s or 40s and you're not where you want to be, like this is a conversation that's for you.
Yeah, if nothing else, maybe it'll give you guys, the audience, maybe a little bit of permission to act on maybe that dream you have or something that you've just got hesitance behind taking action on. Maybe this will be a little bit of extra motivation that you need to take that, at least that next step towards achieving it. So, there's a famous saying, if you want to take the island, burn the boats. And that's really what we want to talk about, is just fully committing to what it is that you're working on, and just understanding how the riskiest move a lot of times is actually not taking a risk at all. Most people think, playing it safe keeps them secure, keeps them kind of in this little bubble. But in reality, it really is staying in your comfort zone. That's when the biggest threat happens to growth and self improvement. So it's kind of this weird double edged sword that I think, for myself included, I had a hard time getting kind of understanding this to the point of actually being able to take the next step and take action.
Yeah, and I think this, what we're really talking about is the skill of learning how to take risk. This isn't something that's taught in school, and you really have to, there's that trial and error part of it, but that's also why it's so important to have mentors, read books. I have found personally that when I educate myself, when I read books, I study up on things that I'm passionate about, and then I find people that are already doing these things. The things that I'm thinking are risky end up being so much less risky than what I was thinking. So when you're starting out, it's good to have some of those other mentors and resources that you can really rely back on, get those opinions, and see how other people did it.
I 100% agree. So let's start off with just the psychology behind all of this, just why the way our brains are wired, just understanding of just the psychology of playing it safe, and why 99% of people never take risks, because they're just in this, sense of they want to feel protected and in their bubble, and not wanting to actually take that initiative to whatever dream or goal they have. When it comes to just the brain itself, there's this evolutionary wiring, just the way that our brains are designed to avoid danger and not chase fulfillment. This goes all the way back to caveman days with, touching fire, and just the survival instinct that is ingrained into all of us, even, a couple thousand years later. And that's just still a big part of this is, we're designed, our brains are wired to protect ourselves and keep ourselves from getting hurt, keep ourselves from failing, from some of these negative, and I'm doing this in quotations if you guys are listening on audio, of really what it means to take risks. So anyways, I just think that's something important to just kind of point out, that The Joseph Campbell, a guy that I'm not that familiar with, a quote that I pulled though, kind of on this topic. He wrote, "The cave you fear to enter holds the treasure you seek." I'll say that one more time. The cave you fear to enter actually holds the treasure you seek.
Yeah, there's that other quote, Everything that you want, everything that you desire is on the other side of fear."
I like that. I haven't heard that one.
Think about that though. I mean, just think about it like going into a cave and there's a treasure in there, but then you got to walk into the cave and it's completely dark. You can't see where you're. I mean, that would be so. Ooh, that'd be tough. I
Hmm.
think like for me, like that and heights. If you told me like there's a treasure on top of this mountain, but there's all of these, oh my god, there's all these cliffs and rocks are breaking off, and you got those billy goats that are on the side of the mountain, and who
Yeah, comfort zones, they feel good, but they definitely cost growth. And I think back to even when I was a little kid going like to the swimming pool, in like third grade, the first time I ever like went over to the diving board. And I just wasn't that comfortable in water as a kid. I knew how to swim, but I wasn't great at it and didn't really enjoy it. So like going off the
Mhm.
diving board was always like a fright, an example of that cave to me. Just at an early age, though, understanding and just getting that sense of satisfaction when you finally do have the confidence to jump off and realize it wasn't that bad. And, just an example as a kid of when this kind of started for me.
Yeah, and that's one thing that is so, exhilarating about overcoming your fears. What is so great about being a kid and growing up is that you have so much passion, so much energy. All of these experiences that you're experiencing are new for the first time, and so life is just so full. As you get older, you have more experiences, and so maybe some of them mean less, but I've always found that overcoming your fears, like doing something that you're afraid of or maybe that you don't wanna do and doing it anyways, there's an element of that is just very empowering and very exhilarating.
We actually had a podcast episode, I think it was maybe a week or two ago, where we were talking about progress over perfection and just understanding that it's never going to be perfect. You just have to take action and just be willing to try, put something out there, even if it's not perfect. And this kind of reminds me a little bit of that episode because it's that same psychology of, you're not going to just always hide behind these delayed decisions you're hiding behind. Oh, I want to research this more first, or this isn't the right time to try and do this, or, whatever it may be. There's always an excuse if you look hard enough for it, but just changing your mindset shift and just being willing to burn the boats. And again, burning the boats, let's just talk for a second now about, the origin and the meaning behind that. So the historical story behind burning the boats. So in 1519, a gentleman by the name of Hernan Cortez, he landed in Mexico and he actually burned his own ships to force his men to commit to conquest. Retreat was no longer an option. It wasn't about destruction. This entire reason for doing this was really just about being 100% in complete total commitment. And that's a
Yeah,
very
wow.
aggressive, very intense way to motivate your army or your team of guys that are going to conquest. But pretty crazy just to think through how that kind of first started.
Especially during that time period, if we're talking 1519 Mexico, like, if you're burning the boats, like, you are not going back to wherever you came from.
Hmm. Yeah, I think a lot of times you'll see other influencers or just stuff on social media where they talk about, you know, uh, failure is not an option, burn the boats, being 100% committed, there is no plan B. I think that's one that you've kind of turned me on to through one of the, I think probably one of my favorite books I read this past year, last year, was There's No Plan B for, what's it called again?
There's no plan B for your A game.
Yeah. And that was Bo Eason, right?
Bo Eason, yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, that I love that. He talks about he describes it a different way, but essentially what he's talking about is just going all in on whatever you're doing. And the reason I love that is Bo is just, I share that his story a lot with my daughter who is pursuing kind of high school athletics. And this is what I find so fascinating. And I just constantly share this piece of his story that I wrote about in the book. When he was in high school, no one before his graduating class had ever made it to the NFL, and since he graduated, no one has made it to the NFL since. But in his graduating class of kids, there were 6 different kids in that graduating class that made it to the NFL. How do you explain that?
It's crazy.
And so what it is though is you had one guy that was so determined and created an environment where he just went all in, but he couldn't do it alone, and he started challenging his friends, and they started working together, kind of sharing that load. And that's why that competition piece is so important, because when you can get others on board to your vision and your goals, you will just naturally push each other, and you will go further than what you would have on your own. And so that's exactly what happened there.
Yeah, if any of you guys are looking for a great book, definitely reach out to Ben or me if you forget what it's called. But it's There's No Plan B for Your A Game by Bo Eason. Definitely worth reading.
Yeah, I know that you're a big Arnold Schwarzenegger fan, and so am I. I'm reading his biography right now, and you want to talk about someone that learned how to take risks. I mean, his biography. The title of the biography is "Total Recall: My Unbelievably True Life Story." And it is just absolutely unbelievable, how he learned to take risks, the vision that he had for himself. And I think that's really important when learning how to take risks, is having a very compelling vision. Because if you have a very compelling vision, your actions and your behaviors, as long as they align and line up with that vision, they're what might look really risky to the outside or to others or people that don't understand that vision and that purpose. You're actually just stepping into who you're called to be. So, anyways, he grew up in a town of Austria. He didn't even have indoor plumbing in his house when he was born in the 40s. Didn't have a car. His family, they would walk or take a bicycle. But at a very young age, he saw bodybuilders in movies, and he just told himself, "I am going to be the best bodybuilder in the world." And this was like age 9 or 10. And that is kind of what started his personal development and the dream of an immigrant. That's why I love immigrants, because immigrants that come to the United States, they believe in the American dream. And reading all of the things that he's accomplished, and I didn't know this, but he was an extensive real estate investor before he got famous. I knew that he had did that a little bit, but since we're in Denver, he actually owned the grounds of Coors Field. I don't know if you knew that.
Mm-mm.
But he's the one that sold that property to I don't know if the Colorado Rockies own that, or if Coors owns that, or who actually owns the stadium there. But he sold that with his business partner in the early '90s, and that became Coors Field. So, like, stuff like that, I didn't know. And this was before he was, he made that investment like before he was like really really famous.
Yeah, I think when he sold it, I forgot after he finished selling it, I forgot what he said. He said like "Hasta la vista, baby."
Yeah, yep, that's it. They said, "I'll be back."
Yeah, that was a horrible joke. Sorry, everybody. All right, well, let's just talk for a minute about just some real life applications here. You can apply burning the boats to a lot of stuff. It doesn't have to be necessarily real estate. It doesn't have to be business. It can also be entrepreneurship. It can be relationships. So we won't spend too much time on this, but Ben, maybe just share. I think one that's relevant for both real estate and entrepreneurship is kind of your story of really being on the fence on leaving a good paying W-2 salary type job at Wells Fargo that you were having a lot of success with, and just realizing that you had bigger plans in your future. You wanted to make more money for you and your family. And you got to the point where you burned the boat, meaning you left your W-2 job and went all in on a 100% commission based job, which obviously has turned into a very smart decision, fast forwarding 10, 15 years later.
Oh my gosh, yeah. I love sharing the story, and thank you for asking. And then I also have a customer story I want to share as well after that. But I got my start in mortgage in 2006. I was a loan officer and loan officer assistant, and like terrible timing. This is right before the market crash. I was an assistant for a year, so I went on my own, like right when the housing crash started. And at that time, I didn't have the experience, I didn't have the skills that I have today, and so it was just so difficult. I got so discouraged, and I told myself, and at the time I was 100% commission. So at the time, I told myself I will never take another commission-based job, and I went into the rest of the industry to really learn the industry inside and out. But all of the roles that I was in were either hourly rate or salary based, because I had had such a bad experience with that commission job. I mean, it turned into something I just hated. I was overwhelmed. I was insecure. I didn't know when I was going to get paid at the time. My son had just been born. He was an infant. I was now a dad, growing a family. And so I decided to kind of get back into the salary role, and I did that for another 10 years. And in 2017, I had an opportunity. I was recruited by a mortgage team, a lending team, to start originating again. And at the time, it was one of the most difficult decisions I had ever made because, number one, my experience prior was so poor, and I was comfortable. I was comfortable on a salary. I knew exactly what I had to budget for, what my spending could be. I was able to have those conversations with my wife, with my family. But deep down, though, I also wanted more, and I knew I was capable of more. And I was interested and attracted to the possibility of going back into this role. But it was so difficult. I just remember agonizing over this decision. And then my wife at the time really, really encouraged me to go do this. And so this was January of 2017. And so I made the leap, said bye to the salary, bye to my previous role, went back into origination, which is 100% commission. So if you're not closing loans, you aren't getting paid. Even if you're taking leads and you're qualified, like, you have to close loans to get paid. The pressure is real. You got to show up every day. It doesn't matter how great last month was. What are you doing this month? What are you doing next month? And then my wife divorced me in 2018. So when you talk about being all in, at that point, I just was in a new career with a new type of pay. I was going through a divorce. I had the kids 24/7, all by myself. I was totally responsible for them. And that was that was kind of my moment. And I even remember talking to my manager saying, with everything I'm going through with this divorce, just kind of starting my career over, I really think I need to go back and do a underwriting manager role and go back onto a salary. And he was like, the decision is yours, but my suggestion is that you don't do that because you're doing exceptionally well at this new role, and I know you're feeling some pressure, but he just really encouraged me and spoke into me. And I'm so glad that I took his advice and didn't go back to that salary role, because my life is forever transformed. I mean, where I'm at today versus where I would have been, I can't even describe to you. Just with like, financial resources, with confidence, the person that I've become, it is just a radically different life. And so I believe a big part of that is because if you look back at my life, that's one of the big kind of timelines, one of the big moments in my life where things could have gone this way or down this road, but instead they went down this road. And so just a little bit of a testimony on how taking that risk and doing it in a right way is can just have tremendous benefits. One thing that I really benefited from is that I had such a strong professional peer group. I mean, my mentor was the number one originator in the state of Colorado. So I told him, I will come work for you and I will accept this under the condition that you allow me to sit right outside your office, just so I can see how you engage and see how you talk to people and see how you behave. I want to develop those skills. I want to have the same conversations. And so I really studied under him for several years. We're still great friends to this day. He's since retired, but that was one of those moments for me that ended up being life-changing.
Yeah, I just was thinking while you're talking about how just the way that the world is today, especially in the United States, and how people get very content, kind of just on coast mode, cruise control.
Mhm.
And that eliminates a lot of people from ever burning the boat, ever really taking that chance. And I'll even say for myself, I'm a pretty motivated guy, but I think to get to that ultra level of just of excelling at a very, very high level, very high achiever, high performer type people, it requires you to be 100% committed. And for maybe somebody like myself, maybe some of our audience that's listening that maybe falls into that same category, like I feel like I've done at times, if you don't burning the boat is an opportunity to force yourself to level up, because there is no plan B. There's no other option. And if you are somebody that is motivated, but you just need that extra push, sometimes it's a lot easier than you think it could be. It's just a matter of burning the boat, and you're going to figure it out. You're either going to figure it out or you're going to fall down. And either way, you're going to get back up and you're going to, learn from it.
I'm so glad that you brought that up. Alex Harmozy talks about this a lot in his content, and I'm a big believer of it. I also see this every day. So, kind of going back to what you said a minute ago there about people coasting and not challenging themselves. This is what I think happens. I think people tie themselves down, and this might make you uncomfortable. This could be considered a little controversial, so there's your warning. But I believe a reason for that is because people tie themselves down with the wrong things. So they tie themselves down with the wrong friends, the wrong peer group, with the wrong type of, they're chasing the wrong things. They have credit card debt. They have an auto loan that they can't afford. And so when you're making payments on two different auto loans and you have outstanding credit card debt, you have all these other obligations that you got to meet. Does that sound like you're in a place to take a risk or be creative? No. A lot of times you can't because you have put yourself into bondage. You've put chains around yourself where you need that income, that consistent income. You can't go unpaid for a month or a couple months, while you're building out that new career. And so that would be my suggestion. It's a lot easier to take a risk and win when you can really not make like to me that's what the risk is.
Mm-hmm.
The real risk is buying the things that you don't need, indebting yourself to things that aren't important, taking out, these toxic loans. I'll even put student loans in that category a lot. And I know that's going to bother some people, but I'll put student loans in that category because a lot of student loans, man, there are so many young folks, and it's not their fault because they're not educated, but the student loans just aren't being used in an appropriate manner. When you do all those things, you have all these obligations, you're hanging out with the wrong people. That is what the real risk is because what you're really saying is no to the healthy risks, to the things that we're talking about.
Very interesting perspective on that. Yeah. I was just thinking about the burning the boats phrase, if you could even relate that to like your friends or people that maybe, you know, in an attempt to get closer to whatever that goal or dream is you have. And it kind of relates to that too. Like a burning the boat example would be maybe cutting up your credit card just to avoid spending money on frivolous things or, there's different ways to look at this, but I think just to kind of keep moving on from there, let's just talk about, kind of on this point about when to say no. There's definitely times when you should not burn the boats. Some of this responsible risk would be maybe another way of phrasing that. And that's kind of what you're talking about, I think, as far as getting these chains put on you by playing it safe for so long, or maybe you do now have a family, other people that are relying on you, how that becomes more challenging to burn the boat in some cases. But I think there's also a confusion between, burning the boats and or burning the boat, I should say, and just being very impulsive or being just not thinking things through correctly. So I think the first thing is like really having a plan, understanding, is it anything that might have a downside or risk that you can't recover very well from? Is there any downside to this risk? And if so, maybe just making sure you're thinking through that in a very certain level. And then just also just understand that, are you really betting on yourself or are you just running away from something else? Like you don't want to burn the boat and you're
That's a good one. That's a good one because I see a lot of people, they go say yes to something or they take the risk on something because they're really running away for something else. If that's why, so that's why, like you got to discover, why am I doing this? What's my, because if that's why, like that's not going to work. You're just setting yourself up for failure because at some point you're going to be in the same position. If I'm not going to go address whatever the real issue is, pretty soon I'm going to be running from this thing too.
I 100% agree. You have a lot of people that I know at least that, kind of have followed down that path where, they spend a couple years pursuing a new career and then they actually get the job or they're about to get the job. And then, you know what, now I'm going to go this direction instead of having that commitment and following through with what you started. Couple just tools and tips when it comes to kind of this burn the boats idea. First off, just making sure that you understand that your plan B, let me rephrase this. You need to burn the boat. You need to basically have no other option other than fulfilling whatever path it is that you're left with, just to have no other option. But just make sure that you are, before doing that, just again, maybe on a piece of paper, maybe on a computer, writing out the pros and cons, really understanding what plan A is, maybe what plan B is. So when it is time to make that commitment, you're just thinking things through and you're not acting out of emotion or acting too hastily. And then just, I think, kind of going off what Ben was saying, is about using some accountability, having mentors, coaches, finding a community of other people that are also trying to do what you're doing. So even if you do burn the boat, you've got a few other people with you on the island to help move you towards the right path.
Yeah, I think those are really great points too. I think that number one, you do need to have some boundaries. And so this is what I always share with my kids. You should never take a risk when it comes to health and safety. And the example that I'll use is, my daughter goes to Wheat Ridge High School, which is off of 32nd and Kipling. And so there's a lot of kids that like to cross Kipling at lunch and go to Sprouts. As you know, Kipling is a major, major street, especially right there. There's a huge hill, so visually you can only see maybe 50 yards depending on where you're crossing if you're not using a crosswalk. So a lot of these kids, they don't like to use the crosswalk because it means that you have to walk, maybe 5 minutes longer round trip. So it just takes a little bit longer to be safe and be responsible. These cars, though, this is a double lane each way. These cars are coming through 40, 50, 60 miles an hour. And my daughter, one of her really good friends, is always encouraging her just to, scamper across halfway, wait out in the turn lane, and then idle out in the middle of this crazy busy street, Kipling, walk halfway out, and then there's going to be cars coming in both directions, and then when the other side frees up, that is so damn dangerous. And so she was sharing a story with me how her friend just kept egging her on, and she said no. She stood up to her and she said, I'm gonna use the crosswalk. I'm not, this is a risk I'm not comfortable taking. And so I was so proud of her to share that with me. So I believe that, when it comes to risks, you should never take a risk when it comes to health and safety. And then some of the emotional risks that you were talking about, it's very easy to get emotional about something. We were sharing a channel, excuse me, we were sharing a story before we hopped on tonight, and you were kind of just sharing about a real estate transaction that you were working through, and how there was a little bit of an emotional element there. And it's like we all experience that, where if we get worked up, we might want to go do something or be aggressive or take action. A lot of times, though, that can be the wrong time to do that. So I'm training myself to really kind of stabilize my thought process, my energy, and then really think through the decisions that I'm making.
That's really good. So just kind of maybe give you guys a few actionable takeaways from this one. Just some key questions maybe to ask yourself if burning the bridge is on your radar with a goal or a dream that you have. It's first thinking through, am I stuck in comfort pretending it's safety? Like, in other words, are you just kind of playing it safe just to avoid maybe doing the more difficult option, which could be burning the and also the one that I like to think about a lot is, what would I do if I couldn't fail? If you had no way of failure, what actions would you be taking? I'm sure they're going to be a little bit more on the aggressive side in that case because you don't have the risk of failure. But, just thinking through kind of some scenarios. If that was the case, what steps would you be taking? And then, kind of reeling it back in a little bit and understanding, is that realistic? Maybe at least some of it is. Maybe it can at least motivate and push you to be a little bit more bullish when it comes to some of that stuff. Just a good way to kind of reframe whatever it is you're trying to achieve. And then the other one would just be, what does it actually cost you just to stay where you are today? And that's an example of what Ben was sharing in his story about, where would he be today if he had not continued down the path of a 100% commission job and went back to this job that probably did not have a whole lot of room for growth and, moving up in the company.
Yeah, and one thing that I'm learning to do as well, and I think about this a lot more. I think about creation a lot. Why are we here? Where did we? Like how? Just not just like Earth, but like the universe. And I am a Christian, and I believe that God created the universe. But I just like thinking about creation. I also think about end of life, like daily. I mean, I think about at some point, like I'm gonna die, and at least here on this earth, my body is going to die. So I think about death daily, and I think, what is that day going to be like when that day comes? What am I going to be like? What's my relationship with the people that I care about? What is that going to look like? What are my kids going to be doing? And from some of the data that I've read about people that are on their deathbeds, most people they don't regret the things they did. They regret the things they didn't do, you know? And so just think back like 20 years. That high school crush that you never asked out. Now that you're 40, does that matter at all right now? Any significance in your life today? If maybe you did ask the crush out, you're married to her. Who knows?
Yeah, the trip I did after college where I went backpacking through Central and South America for 4 or 5 months and thinking about, if I had not done that, just some of this kind of, we were saying kind of regret or just I wish I would have, because it gets harder,
Mhm.
the older you get, some of these dreams and goals maybe you have are a lot more realistic and achievable at a certain time in your life. So I think it's also good to just on this topic is kind of thinking from that 10,000-foot view or just kind of looking at your entire life, having a little bit of strategy behind that and understanding that, hey, I'm in my 40s, so I really need to do this before I get into my 50s and I won't be physically capable maybe to do that, or I won't have the ability because my kids will be in high school at that point, whatever it may be. Just thinking through though on a bigger, grander scale to hopefully maybe be a little bit more likely to succeed.
Yeah, and I think that when you have that long-term perspective, I think that's so important because it's just another form of delayed gratification. So, you and I go to the gym every morning, and we're not only doing that for our physical and mental health right now, but the 50-year-old Adam is thanking the 40-year-old Adam for the efforts that you're putting in today. And so the real risk is not going to the gym. That's the risk.
Yeah, that's a really good way to think about it. Good mindset shift. I'd like to just share one last quote with you guys. I think this one's pretty good. Most people don't fail because they went too big. They fail because they stayed small for too long. And that's, I think, similar too to what Ben was saying about the on your deathbed, just the regret you might have, or the things that are most important, or the things you maybe didn't do. I think that's kind of along those same lines. And just, the people that are really, really successful in life, I bet you 99% of them have failed a lot of times. They've probably burned a few boats. And it's just a matter of building up that resilience and that mindset shift of what failure even is, and understanding that failure doesn't mean that you are worthless or that you did something wrong. It's just that you tried something, it didn't work out, and you're one step closer to hopefully making it work on the next thing.
Over this past 18 months, I have read Phil Knight's biography,
Shoe
Shoe
dog.
Dog. I've read Warren Buffett's Snowball. I'm reading Arnold Schwarzenegger's right now. I've read Lee Iacocca's, John D. Rockefeller's. I read J.P. Morgan Chase's, Andrew Carnegie. And there's common themes and threads in all of these stories. And one thread that is just in every single biography that I read is just constant, consistent, immense failure. But there's also a common theme in that response to failure. How do they respond to failure? And all of these examples, they never let the failure defeat them. And so failure, if that's what you're afraid of, or if that's what your risk is, it's an important part of the building process with relationships, with your personal growth, with your career. You have to be willing to fail.
It was just a bomb you just dropped on everybody, man. That was good. I like that.
Dropping some bombs. Now, there is one exception to that, and like this, I cannot get over the whole Nico Harrison trading Luka Doncic to the Lakers. I can't answer that.
Yeah, I'm not, and I kind of know what you're talking about, but not exactly. I know who Luca is. I know the first person you said. That's the coach.
Yeah, he got traded from the Mavericks to the Lakers, and so it just caused this big uproar in the NBA.
Well, I see one other quote that we have on our notes. Ben, you want to share that one before we close this one
Yeah,
out?
here's a final quote here. So, burning the boats isn't about being fearless. It's about believing your future is worth the fire. And I also think that's something like really, really important to acknowledge that we're not saying that you're not gonna have some fear.
Oh yeah, it's scary.
We're not saying that you're not gonna be afraid. Like that's but what are you gonna do in the midst of that? Are you gonna turn around and not walk into the cave? Or are you gonna walk through and see what's on the other side? And
Love
that's
that.
ultimately what it's about.
That's awesome. Well, you guys, I enjoyed talking about this topic. I think burn the boats is just a fun idea just to kind of play with and apply it to a lot of different practical things in all of our lives. Just kind of want to close out though and just thank everybody for another week of support on the Pursuit of Progress podcast. And hopefully, if you guys are still listening, you're still stuck around till the end of this one. Just want to remind you that we have an awesome webinar that we'd love to invite you. It's all about how to succeed as a home buyer in Denver, Colorado. But even if you're not in Denver and you're listening from somewhere else, still get some value from it. If you guys want to join the next one, I'd love for you to do so. Check it out at webinar.adamsillsdenver.com. You guys can grab a free ticket there. These are live. They're free, and we pack them full of a lot of great tips and techniques to succeed. Hopefully you guys can connect with us there too as well.
Now, our producer said that, and tell me if there's any truth to this, but is next week's episode Burn the Bridges? I'm kidding. It's a joke. I'm kidding. How to ruin and tarnish relationship, burning bridges. You burn the boats, burn the bridges.
I gotcha. I almost burned the bridge tonight on that one with you. Not laughing. Sorry, dude. Not to be supporting you.
It's like, do I laugh here or do I just smile and not laugh?
Yeah. All right, guys. Hope you enjoyed it. I know we did. Again, share the show with anybody else that you think could get some value from this. As always, I'm Adam, signing off for Ben Adams on a Pursuit of Progress podcast episode. We'll see you guys next week.
Love you guys. We'll see you next week.